Welcome to the Power of Babble, the podcast where nothing's off the table. From Bible mysteries and strange phenomena to the questions that keep you up at night, we explore it all with curiosity and faith. I'm your host, Courtney, joined by my co-hosts, Caleb and Jeremy. Together, we dive into the weird, the wonderful, and the wildly curious. So grab your coffee, open your mind, and let's babble. Hey guys, all right, we're back with the Power of Babble, Season 2. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
No, not really.
No.
Season 2 and nothing has changed. It's amazing.
And yet everything has changed.
Nothing and everything. If I'm being honest, I don't know that I quite believed we would make it past episode 1. If you can remember back to episode 1.
Wow, what
of season 1.
What a revelation from you that you had that little faith in us. That's real.
I think I had little faith in myself.
Yeah. I thought that we might get past episode 1, but I didn't think that anyone would listen. That's the difference, I think.
And we have listeners.
Yeah, we do.
We have lots of listeners, so that's been encouraging.
Yeah.
So season 1 was great. We had a lot of special guests on the podcast. We have a lot to look forward to in season 2. Lots of special guests. We also might want to bring back some old ones now, since that we're on video. Hey everyone that's tuning in on video today.
Except that has changed.
So. That has changed. Yeah, we're officially on video. So, and I just need to say that I don't know what it is. Something about this setup, people viewing us, I am feeling a little unhinged today.
Yeah.
And I've made it a personal goal of mine to bring Alien Courtney episode energy to every episode of season 2.
That's right.
Yes.
If the listeners and viewers now, which is crazy,
yeah,
are not familiar, go back and listen to the Alien episode. That version of Courtney, by the way, that's the real Courtney.
That's me.
This is the real Courtney. And that's the Courtney that we're going to be looking forward to in season 2 for sure.
I'm excited. I don't know. There's something about it. And there's also something about, I feel like in season 1, you really, and this is not a humble brag. Out of the 3 of us, I am not the smartest. And so in season 1, I feel like because we were just audio, what people didn't get was when y'all went on y'all's little rabbit holes and like really just got in the weeds where I didn't understand. I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Now I have people that like, the listeners are here with me. The viewers are here with me now. So y'all can do y'all's other thing. Listen, we're together. We're locked in.
Are those
it's going to be a good
in the room with us right now?
No, but it gives me maybe. It gives me a peace to know that I have friends in the room that understand what I'm going through. And so we're locked in here. Me and the viewers, we're like this.
Yeah, what they're going to find out is that you're really not one of them. You're actually a nerd, and you're in disguise. You've been in disguise this whole time.
That's crazy.
What the listeners / viewers, well, really just the viewers, are going to discover is like all the times we give each other side eye or various nonverbal cues.
Yeah, when Jeremy is sharpening his knife, when I'm berating his beloved anime or something.
I still can't believe that sound never shows up on the audio
it's crazy.
recording. It's crazy.
Good
I
mics.
would expect that to show up, but it's a wonder of modern technology.
So what we're saying is season 2, we're just bringing it, and it's going to be a wonderful season.
Yeah.
Anything that you're excited or looking forward to in season 2?
So much. I mean, we had a meeting in the off season, I guess.
We did have a meeting
to talk about what some of the topics were we're going to discuss, and I think we're going to have some strange topics. We're going to have some really interesting things. I think if you enjoyed season 1, I think you're really going to enjoy season 2. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I also wouldn't mind circling back to some of the things that I feel like a lot of times we kind of left it. We're like, oh, we could say so much more on the topic.
You promised a lot of episodes.
And here we are in season 2, and we can do it.
Yeah. Follow-ups for sure.
Okay. So what are we diving into today? What are we talking about?
What are we talking about? Jeremy, do you want to tell our listeners / viewers what we're discussing today?
Have any of y'all ever heard of something called MKUltra?
Yeah.
I had not until we had discussed doing this. And I'm not good with history in general. I know I need to be better. I truly had no idea. So
Yeah,
I'm ready to be enlightened.
this one is a little bit of it's okay if you've never heard of
Yeah.
it, because this one is a little bit of hidden history.
Yeah.
Hidden.
Purposefully.
Yes.
So we'll get into this a little bit. It's hidden, but I think parts of it have been intentionally revealed.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was obscured history. I mean, they
Yes.
were intentionally, like you're alluding to, that trying to keep this behind closed doors, but
But
it's
what
something.
is? But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
What
What
is
is
MK
MKUltra?
Ultra?
So we discussed this a little bit in our episode when we were talking about aliens, actually.
Yeah.
'Cause
Unhinged.
unhinged. This is the episode where we were talking about all the different possibilities to explain like the UFO phenomena, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things, I can't remember if I mentioned it or Jeremy mentioned it, but we were talking about MK Ultra, which was it used to be a top secret government program um, performed by the CIA, where they were testing the use of hallucinogenic drugs, particularly LSD,
Okay.
on people,
Yep.
on human beings. And the goal, the whole idea of the project was to induce mind control capabilities.
Okay.
Now this is, and we're already getting into territory that is a little. It's hard to know what exactly is true. So I'll give you.
Yeah.
So loosely, the MK Ultra program, from what I've been able to find out from sources that I may or may not trust, we'll get into that. Is started around the 50s at some point, or at least its forerunner started around the 50s and went through probably the early 70s in some form of MK Ultra and maybe beyond. So it's a post-war Cold War CIA program. And I've seen it described as the CIA getting really paranoid and thinking that like Soviet agents have infiltrated everything and we need to figure out a way to ferret out the Soviet agents. So they were like, well, there's this new thing called LSD that was developed in Switzerland. Let's get our hands on this. Oh, it's making people do weird and crazy things that they wouldn't normally do. Maybe we could do some research and use this as part of like a truth serum that would expose enemy sleeper agents. Now, um, a lot of our audience is probably familiar with the idea that NASA was actually built off the back of, World War II German
Nazis.
Nazi rocketry propulsion research.
Yeah, that's called Operation Paperclip.
This is also
Didn't
true.
know that.
Yeah.
This is also true of MK Ultra. From what I've been able to figure out, there were cases where the Nazis were dosing people with various things in an attempt to do like a truth serum and change their behavior, and doing this in a systematic way on prisoners of war and concentration camp victims, like at Dachau.
Yeah.
So basically, the idea was the CIA knew about this. This new drug LSD comes on the scene. There's this atmosphere of paranoia, and the Soviets are, and they now have nukes. So great, that's awesome. And so the CIA decides we've got to do something about this, and so they start leaning heavily into LSD, other chemical things, but also other environmental and social psychology stuff to try to figure out, well, how can we like mind break people in various ways? And the original goal is like, let's get them to tell the truth and to do what we say, but also it goes in some really weird directions. They do some extremely shady stuff from what I've been able to tell. And some of it is actually public record and verified. Like they just randomly dose CIA agents with LSD to see what happens in social situations.
Yeah.
Because they're like, well, we have all these lab studies, but what happens if we just put LSD in somebody's coffee in the middle of the day? What happens then? So and then they experiment on especially psychiatric prisoners. They get like beatniks and hippies to volunteer for studies that they may or may not know the extent of what they're going to be subjected to. Um, I think Whitey Bulger, who's a
Yeah.
famous mob boss, has alleged that while he was in federal prison, they were dosing him and fellow prisoners with LSD like for
That's
days
crazy.
and days and
Yeah,
days.
it was
on
when he was in prison in Atlanta. Actually,
Yeah.
they
So the whole idea was, were they just using like drugs, or for whatever reason when y'all talk about it, I imagined
Mhm.
them like hooking people up to like machines and stuff and
so
doing
you
stuff.
have to kind of go back in time a little bit.
Yeah.
And Jeremy alluded to some of this, which is that prior to the CIA, okay, so the CIA really becomes a an entity of the United States government the intelligence agencies focused on foreign affairs during the Cold War primarily.
Yeah.
But prior to this, during World War II, there was another organization that most people have probably never heard of, and this is an organization called the OSS.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Never heard
I
of it.
can't actually remember
So
off the top of my head what that stands for.
Office of
It's
Special Services,
something like
I
that,
don't
right?
know. Yeah.
Just
Okay.
Google OSS, you'll find it. But their OSS was basically during the war. They contracted um, certain scientists, one in particular whose name was Lovell, I believe, to basically do the James Bond thing. Right? He has M, who gives him all of his gadgets and things like that. They basically created a wing of this agency that was focused on doing that sort of thing, and the kinds of things that they did. There's an amazing book called the Dirty Tricks Department. The reason why is because that was a nickname actually for the OSS.
Mhm.
They did really mind blowing things. This is during the war. Things like uh, attaching explosive devices to bats and releasing them into the wild.
Yep.
Oh, bats. Okay. I was thinking of
Like
like a baseball bat.
no,
Okay.
to the
Oh,
the
wow.
flying winged
Yeah, like
animals.
the little
Okay.
They put
Okay.
explosive devices inside them or on them in some way that were timed devices, and then they sent them out because they knew that the bats would go
Mhm.
the into the attics of certain buildings
Yeah.
in places that they wanted to destroy.
Okay.
And then this is one of the techniques. The craziest one, in my opinion, and there's a great book. I mentioned the first book by I can't remember the author's name, but the Dirty Tricks Department. But he also has another book on MKUltra called Project Mind Control. It's a really excellent book. But one of the things that they talk about in the book is that they had figured out that Japanese culture included some sort of myth. I'm ignorant on what the myth is exactly, but there was some sort of myth that involved foxes that glowed with some kind of like supernatural glow.
Yeah.
And in Japanese culture, this was supposedly a harbinger of doom.
Yeah.
Right, like if this happened, if you saw one of these creatures, one of these figures, this was a sign of imminent doom. And so what they did is they took foxes and they took raccoons, and they painted them and covered them with radioactive material that made them
Okay.
glow in
Wow.
the dark.
Yeah.
This is
This is
not
crazy.
this is not a conspiracy. This is verified
It
in
happened.
unclassified documents. This is actually real, and they released them into the wild, to hoping that Japanese soldiers and people would see this and think that it was a real supernatural
Okay.
harbinger of their own doom. Right?
Right.
This is the kind of thing that the government was already up to in World War II.
Yeah.
And the reason why this is significant is because what this means is they take these ideas, and then when the CIA is formed during the Cold War context, they say we're going to try and do the same sort of project, except we're taking it to the next level.
Yeah.
And
So it
that's
started with kind of like trickery, and then it kind of escalated
well,
to
and the
the
reason
too
I mention
much.
this is because there was a project during that program that was focused on creating a truth serum
Mhm.
that Jeremy mentioned, right? They wanted to do a truth serum, so it's some kind of a drug that we could give someone, and then when we interrogate them, they would tell the truth. It failed; they weren't
Yeah.
able to achieve it. The obsession that you were describing, Jeremy, is actually sort of not just the fact that they were concerned that there were lots of Soviet spies, but also because they had heard about the Pavlov's dog
Yeah.
experiments,
Yeah.
right? Which is this
I've heard of that, but
it's this idea that if you by conditioning a dog, they could with a bell every time you feed the animal, you ring a bell, right? And they would condition the animal in such a way that they could ring the bell with no food, and it would cause the dog to water at the mouth
Right.
and expect food, right?
Mhm.
This kind of conditioning. So the theory was that this kind of conditioning could be applied to humans,
Right.
and that humans could be conditioned in such a way that their mind could be shaped. Brainwashing
Yes.
is where this comes from. So the Americans became really, really concerned that that the Soviets had learned how to control people, because they had had several of American spies sort of flip and spill the beans.
Mm.
And so they were concerned that the Soviets had done this, and if they had done this, then we had better start our own project
Right.
to try to control.
And this is where you get things like the Manchurian Candidate, which was a movie, but that idea
Mm.
was something that people have alleged that MKUltra was up to, right? Trying to develop a Manchurian Candidate, like a sleeper agent within the high levels of, other governments who they could basically control through means that the person themselves doesn't actually know. You also get a documented instance. There was a case in which MKUltra actually spilled over into Canada because there was a Canadian psychologist who was doing research on like psychological priming, which was like kind of like it started out as kind of like a positive brainwashing where it was like, positive messages like, oh, I'm going to accomplish a lot, like that and whatever just played over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
And he was like developing this theory that, you could actually change people's behavior just through like brute force messaging. And the CIA heard this and was like, oh, goody, we'll fund this. And they did other things. But it's important to say though, like oftentimes MK Ultra is represented as, well, it depends on what source you look at. It's strongly associated with LSD, but it's not just LSD. I got on the CIA's website last night, and probably on a watch list now. I was probably already on some watch lists.
Yeah.
But because of subsequent things that have happened in history, some of these documents about what MKUltra was up to have been made public through Freedom of Information requests. And the CIA website hosts, PDFs of those documents. So I just was like, okay, let's just see what we can see. So I just clicked on like a random one. I read the PDF, and it was something that sounds really innocuous but could actually be very horrifying. Was where they weren't dosing people with drugs, but they were like, okay, well, let's take psychiatric patients and let's adjust the level of ambient carbon dioxide in the air that they're breathing, because this is something that like with anxiety and whatever, it has something to do with the percentage or the rate of carbon dioxide in the human body in the blood versus the rate that's ambient in the atmosphere. And if people like hyperventilate because of anxiety, it has to do with that tension between the two rates. And they say, okay, well, let's affect the environmental amount of carbon dioxide and see if that can induce an anxious state or calm an anxious state. So you see where this is getting into
Oh my
human
God.
psychology
Yeah.
and behavior. And in the proposal, they ended up not spending a whole lot of money on this, apparently, if the records can be believed. But they said in the write-up, this is kind of a long shot, but we're going to look into this and you could see how something like that could be potentially very useful for controlling or manipulating people. And one of the things they mentioned specifically was, well, if this works, we can use it to stress test our agents to see how likely it would be that they would crack. And if you think about it, if you turn that around on its head, if this works, we can use this to crack enemy agents. Right?
Yeah. So let's take people that aren't mentally stable
Yeah.
and see how far we can push them.
Which is like, it sounds cruel, but when you think about it, there's a reason why they would prefer to use psychiatric patients. One of the famous phrases you hear is they chose people who couldn't fight back, largely.
Yeah.
People on the edges of society, people they could blackmail, people who were mentally handicapped or psychiatrically unstable, because
Or
people
poor people.
or
Well, I'm
poor
gonna
people.
say this is
Let's get into
only
that.
things that they're sharing with us.
Right.
So, and this is kind of my next question is, okay, so there some of it's proven to be true because
Mhm.
when y'all were talking about it, I was like, okay, but is this a conspiracy theory? But so they're already sharing so much that they actually did.
Not
What are they not
intentionally.
sharing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're
Well, this gets into how do we even know that MK Ultra exists? And it's a very interesting, shady history.
And did it end? Is it?
Did
I
it?
mean,
Well, we
because
don't
I don't know anything
By that name,
about
did
it.
Yeah.
because in the fallout from Watergate, the CIA director at the time said, "You know what? It would probably be bad if the public finds out all of this sensitive information the same way they've been able to like use government records to learn more about other things that have been going on. So let's just destroy all the records." And so, and the archivist or whatever at the CIA were like, "That's kind of a bad idea." But the CIA director showed up in person and made sure that most of the records were destroyed in the early 70s.
Shady.
So there are a couple of incidences that occur. One is a journalistic thing as well, which is that someone had made a mistake of making someone within the CIA
Mhm.
had made a mistake of making a list of all the things that the dirty little secrets that could be embarrassing to the agency and to the government.
Well, that's not a mistake. I'm
And
happy for it.
well, the a journalist, I can't remember, I can never remember anyone's name. These are things that you can look up in the books that I've
Yeah.
mentioned, though. Um, that there was a journalist who obtained that list,
Yeah.
obtained that information, and basically wrote an article and put it in a major newspaper, something like the New York Times or one of those, basically outlining these are the illegal acts that the CIA has done.
Yeah.
Making this a public issue is what actually forced the government to confess that some of these
We gotta
programs
release
actually
them.
existed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was the Church Commission, or
Yes.
the Church Commission in Congress, led by a congressman named Church. That was his last name. And unfortunately, though, by that point, the CIA had already destroyed most of the records. I mean, they found things here and there.
Particularly with
Um,
respect to MKUltra, because
Yes.
the guy who was in charge, some people will call him the mad scientist because he was a chemist who was basically in charge of developing these programs within MKUltra. His name was Sidney Gottlieb.
Mhm.
And Sidney Gottlieb had one of his assistants incinerate all of the records that he was aware of connected to this project.
Yeah.
And so as far as he was concerned, everything had been destroyed.
Yeah.
All of the evidence that it had taken place.
Except the government being the bureaucratic
Yeah.
quagmire that it is.
Yeah.
There's
They had
always something else.
someone had
always more.
moved some of the file cabinets to another building.
Yep.
Oh,
Specifically,
so legit things were left
well,
behind.
Yes.
they were, but it was mainly stuff relating to financial records, budget requests, and budget proposals, which is what I was looking at last night. It
So
was
what did that
basically
show?
it was basically like, so most of it is about how much money was spent and saying like, well, here's how much money you gave us. We ended the program. We had $42 left. Here's the check for $42. Like boring stuff like that. But it also has things like names. And also in what I was looking at, there was an initial write-up of what is this project? What do we hope it will do? Which was the kind of like, here's why you should give us money internally.
Yes.
And
Juicy.
and there were like I think around 2,000 of such documents that were discovered much later. When the initial church commission was happening, as I understand it, it was mostly just testimony, sworn testimony, and conveniently, the people in charge of MKUltra said that they didn't remember much about MKUltra. Conveniently, but they had all kinds of other testimony, and it was enough to
had
convince
LSD.
people that something had happened. It was pretty serious. It was probably pretty bad. All of that, and then all of this stuff gets found later.
Yeah, and so when they find these documents have a lot more information about what the program was actually doing, what its purpose was,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so there, this caused there to be some depositions where people like Sidney Gottlieb were taken and deposed, and they were interrogated by an attorney to basically find out what we could find out. We didn't find out a lot because my guess is that most of the information that is really, really damning and embarrassing to the government was destroyed, probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
But we have enough to know that they did things like you were mentioning, Jeremy, this whole idea of the taking inmates in prison and doing the testing on them. Some of the more troubling ones to me are where they actually just go into slums and ghettos and find people who are homeless or poor or just drug addicts, things like that, and then do the testing on them. And in some cases, they are told that they are being given some kind of a drug. But there were some individuals in the program who had far less qualms about administering these kinds of drugs unbeknownst to the person.
Yeah.
In fact, there are examples of this happening with CIA agents
Yeah.
who were dosed.
Including there's an example of a guy in D.C., a random CIA guy, who was dosed with LSD and proceeded then to basically run across Washington, D.C. in a terrified, manic state because everyone he saw looked like a monster.
Wow.
And there's like stuff like this happening, you know.
Well-
There was a person later who was not a CIA agent who claimed that he was dosed with LSD at a dinner party, and it then led him to commit like a robbery like later that night. And this was never conclusively determined to be the case. But
There's a pretty good argument.
There's all sorts of
he had diary
stories,
evidence showing that he was at the party with the people who were known for drugging people without their knowledge, and then he had a psychotic break of some sort.
Yeah.
Committed a robbery,
and then he went to prison.
And
then years later, when this
it had more mind control than him in prison.
well,
see, here's the deal, though. I mean, this shows that like these crazy episodes show the reason why MKUltra in its form then was discontinued. It's because they figured out, LSD isn't like a truth serum or a brainwashing serum.
Yeah, you're not
it
really
just
controlling
causes people to bug out in really crazy ways most of the time.
Right.
As far as we know. Here's the thing, though, about all of this that's hanging over it. I'm sure there's like even such basic things as what does the name MKUltra refer to? What does it refer to? I'm sure there's an answer out there. Maybe some scholar has definitively tracked it down. But I looked at two fairly common information sources, Britannica and Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia, not always reputable, but sometimes it's fun to see, where the hyperlinks for notes go. Wikipedia said MKUltra is a cryptonym for in a department of the CIA, the MK part. It's a cipher, and then ultra is just a random word out of the dictionary. Britannica says the ultra refers to the level of importance of the project.
Yikes. Okay.
So they're saying two very, very different things about what the name means. Interestingly, I couldn't really find sources for either. And then you have to ask yourself, well, how do the sources that we have, how do we have them? It's because someone in the government said, here you go, public, here's
it's
the
out there
sources.
for a reason.
And then you have to ask yourself, the CIA has a website that's hosting all of these things that have been covered up through Freedom of Information Act requests that historically the CIA did not want uncovered, allegedly. And then you have to ask yourself, why is it that we have access to these things? Is it just a matter of happenstance that the actual records we do have were discovered after the fact? So it's very easy to go down this hall of mirrors and say, well, the information that we have, even if the records are real, is it all of it? Is it just what they want us to see? Why was it released when it was released?
I have
So basically, you have to you can get into a situation where
what is happening?
This is I have to adjust this to make sure it's
oh my
truly
God.
effective.
And this is why I need you guys.
So
Send help.
For our audio listeners, Jeremy has pulled out from behind a pillow a literal, and this is a hyperbolic statement, a literal tinfoil hat.
I absolutely have to take a picture.
It's functional too because it's it has.
We'll let you know, audio listeners,
it's
what I'm dealing with.
But this I'm just underscoring here.
Your insanity.
The fact that
have you gone through MK?
Maybe I have. Maybe we all have.
Maybe we are right now.
But see, the fact is that
truly am.
It is difficult to tell. This is looking into this and taking this seriously. if you are at all skeptical of official institutions and things like that, it's like, well, you have the government already admitting that they were doing all sorts of, horrible experiments on unwitting people. What else are they doing that
Yeah.
they're not telling us?
Yeah, I
You
have a
know,
couple of
and
places that I wanna go, but because I feel like the conspiracy theory that I wanna talk about is gonna take us deeper, so I'll start with this one. My, initial just gut reaction to this is just morality, because you mentioned, like, okay, well, they're choosing, like, these psychiatric patients, they're going to into
Mhm.
prisons and the slums, like, you're coming off of the and again, I'm not good with history, but you're coming off, like, the coattails of World War II. I mean, talk about morality. And then the Cold War, like, what makes them think that they're doing anything better or different than what was happening,
So the question, the moral question,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and what we're talking about here is applied ethics, right? This is a real world, right? We're
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
we're making decisions. One of the big questions that hovers over a lot of what was done during World War II and in its wake, especially during the Cold War as well, um, is because of the moral weight of the evil threat of something like Nazi Germany. There became this sentiment amongst a lot of people that the ends justify the means,
Mhm.
So it's
right?
yeah.
So
Okay.
basically, the claim is like, look, if the threat is existential enough, then whatever means necessary to overcome that threat are therefore then morally justified.
So we're gonna fight evil with evil.
That's right. You got to fight fire with fire sometimes. So look,
Well,
if the Soviets are creating mind control and they are, this whole Pavlov's dog thing, then we'd better beat them to it because we're the good guys. See, this is the assumption,
That's
and
what
this
we've
is
always done, though.
well,
We gotta
but
beat
see,
everybody to
I
it.
I would argue that at a certain point, probably before MKUltra gets started, among the higher level operatives and intelligence agents and things like that, the people running things, I don't think good and evil enters into the calculation. I think, and that is the problem. I think that it becomes more a technocratic approach in the sense that we have an objective: the preservation and spread of the influence of the United States as it currently exists in its current form, right? We're going to perpetuate this country, whatever. Sometimes it's just as simple as we're going to perpetuate our own agency's power and control. But
but
the
democracy in
yeah,
general as opposed
democracy.
to
and
communism,
and if you think about it that way, remove good and evil, right? Or if you have to have them say, well, democracy good, communism bad,
which is what
and
they
that's
said.
that's as far as it goes. That's just a presupposition. We don't have to elaborate that, think critically about that anything. Then it just becomes, how do we accomplish this goal? And good and bad don't enter into it. And I think there's a version of that story which I think chimes with the original Tower of Babel, which is why we're
Mhm.
talking about this, right?
Tower of Babel.
Which is human effort trying to accomplish a goal for terms that we set for ourselves, engaging in something that is monstrous, horrible, and that brushes up against, territory that we should not.
Mm.
And, so to the average person, this is horrifying. To the people that were thinking this up, like, I don't think that you can greenlight these experiments and stuff in the way that they were doing and continue to cling to any kind of complex or well thought out version of good and evil. I think you just have to, with a modern condition, the secular um, moral imaginary, which is really just about, how do we accomplish this goal? This goal is good. How do we accomplish it?
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned the Power of Babel. Sorry, the
Mhm.
Tower of Babel. Are there examples or what comes to mind for you guys when you think of things like that's happening in the world and in context of scripture? Do we see like examples like that to where
Yeah.
we see this?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, well, really, with respect specifically to MK Ultra, I would say that any time and the occasions in which it happens are too numerous to count, where persons attempt to exert coercion over other people,
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you think about it from a theological point of view, right, to impose one's will, the example that comes to my mind is um, right, the immoral use of power for your own personal
Mhm.
gain
Yeah.
reminds me of David, right, with
Mm.
what he does with Bathsheba,
Yeah.
right, and the use of power to control the will of another person,
Yes.
to reach the end that you want to reach. What this is, if you think about it from a theological point of view, is it is placing yourself in the position of God.
Yeah.
Now, it's doing it in a perverse way, though, because think of this, okay? It's saying I'm the supreme, almighty figure in this context, and my will supersede all other wills and all other agendas, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
And so that's how it's elevating yourself to the divine. But beyond that, it's perverse. The reason why I say it's perverse is not just because it's the wrong person claiming to be God, but also because that's not actually the character of God.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
God does
Yeah.
not coerce the will. Right?
Yes.
Contrary to some of our Reformed brethren. But this is the clear testimony of Scripture, I think, is that God wants to be in covenant relationship with humanity. Now His will is supreme insofar as His purposes will be accomplished at all costs. I say at all costs, but there are some things that are just beyond the capacity of God because they're beyond His nature. One of which would be to act in an immoral way so as to coerce someone's behavior or coerce their love or things of that nature. He doesn't do it. In fact, it's not what he wants, because what he wants is he wants other creatures who are created in his image, and part of what it means to be made in the image of God is some kind of being that has agency,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
That has free will. And so I think that this kind of a horror story of what happened
Yeah.
with MKUltra is just another example of humans doing what we've constantly done.
Yeah.
The Tower of Babel thing that you mentioned.
We're trying to stand in the position of God, but we don't have nearly the faculties. And so we end up trying to do unnatural, perverse, awful workarounds to
Yeah.
achieve the same effect.
Yeah.
It is like a form of witchcraft when you think about it.
Mm.
Yes.
It's the intent is the same, the spirit is the same.
Yeah.
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 Because witchcraft really at its most basic form is um, taking the elements that we have, the tools that we have of nature or of God's creation, and manipulating them in order to accomplish some ends, often nefarious ends,
Right.
right? And this is really what they did with MKUltra. They took science and what reason they had and and this is what the Tower of Babel is, right? I mean, it's let's take our ability to construct this tower or our ability to work together and accomplish some goal, and never stop to ask, is the goal we're trying to accomplish good?
Mm.
Yeah.
Right? Is it something that God intends for us to do? And then what happens is you leave in your wake just a cacophony of people who are wounded and broken because of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, and I think you mentioned this earlier. It may have been off camera, but just it's what we have done from the beginning. So, thinking about Genesis 3, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit
Yeah.
about
So
that.
so what I was kind of thinking in those terms is what we've talked about so far in this whole conspiracy. Well, the reason why this is unnerving, this particular story is so fascinating to me, is because of how unnerving it is. The reason it's unnerving is because it is not a conspiracy in the sense of a conspiracy theory. This is a fact,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's on the CIA website.
Right.
Yeah.
This happened, right? And so because it's not a theory, and this one is a real tangible thing, it what it sparks in me is a natural question, which is what are in those files that were destroyed,
Right.
right?
Or what are in the files that still exist that just haven't been made public?
That's right. Or what other similar programs existed or even currently exist,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
what might they be doing, right?
And
What?
also what is public acknowledgement of MKUltra covering for?
Yes, yeah. I
Like
I think that some of it is a hide in plain sight kind of thing, because it's like, well, first of all, they were discovered. The idea that this, because of the testimony of people, because of the discovery of some of these files that had depositions which uncovered information. So they're able to hide in plain sight by saying, "Oh, we confess.
Yeah.
We did a bad thing."
So did they just like release this and then it stopped? Is that like what how did it end, or at least what people think ended?
I have heard, I I've seen a little, again, my knowledge of this mile wide, inch deep. Um, there's some speculation that MK Ultra isn't just one thing. There was a program called MK Ultra, but there's actually like a bunch of MK spin-offs that are closely related with similar goals, but that had different names.
Okay.
And there's some evidence to suggest or reason to suspect that the reason what we call MK Ultra, that like archipelago of like evil science experiments, the reason that that stopped is because new drugs were invented. Like BZ, I think is one that was mentioned, which is like a much more aimed at accomplishing, either a truth serum or altering mental states in a controlled manner according to the CIA's aims in like the 70s at some point. So there is reason to suspect, like obviously, the incentive, the reason why the CIA would want to do such a thing hasn't gone away. And just because, that project stops, like what else are they up to?
Yeah.
And in a post Watergate like situation where the head of the CIA and whatever knows that, like, oh, if we write it down or have it or acknowledge it internally, it could eventually be made public. Then anything that's going on from that point forward is going to be a lot harder to figure out what's going on.
So
Well, everyone's focus goes on what is published, and then it's kind
That's
of
right.
like a
Hi-
okay, well,
a
we
hi-
can do this
Right.
because everybody's focused on
That's
that.
right. That's why I say a hide in plain sight thing.
So-
Because they'll say, "Oh, we confess. Look, this is what we did.
Yeah.
It was bad." Meanwhile, the real stuff is happening in the background.
So to my mind, there's a reason to believe that um, if the various agencies are acknowledging certain things about MK Ultra in the present or closer to the present time, it's possibly because that kind of like, that cat's out of the bag. Let's give people something to chew on over here.
Mm.
Whatever else we're doing,
Yeah.
Yeah, they can do it in the background.
There-
well, that's not MK Ultra, and that's not
Right.
even on people's radar. I don't know.
There are
This
a
is why I have
couple
the
of
hat.
a couple of things that I'm going
He
to segue.
still has on the hat. That's
I'm
crazy.
I'm going to segue to the hat as well because a couple things should be pointed out. I mean, you mentioned some of these spin-off kind of programs that they were having. Um, one of the things that the files I think that they discovered showed because of the money trail showed that what they were actually doing was they were funding real scientists
Yes.
through puppet corporations.
Yes.
So the CIA would create a corporation that was fictitious. It wasn't real.
Okay.
An organization of some sort. And then they would take government funds and put it into this organization, and then they would create grants, and then they would give the grant money to a scientist. So they'd find a scientist at Harvard or some other school or some other institution, and they would say, "Hey, this is the organization for human anthropology, whatever," and which is just it's a puppet. It's not even a real thing. And they said, "We want to give you a grant to do research on LSD."
Yeah.
And then they give them $1 million and say, "Go do research." Meanwhile, the scientist, unbeknownst to them, is doing experiments on human beings for the government.
Yeah.
Without their own knowledge.
And this is
Right.
this is actually like certain versions of this are actually some of the more palatable forms of MK
Yes.
Ultra because
Because-
it's an independent academic who doesn't know they're being controlled by the CIA, who for that reason is still operating within the bounds.
But this was also the
of
1950s.
of responsible experimental design, if those bounds themselves are ethical.
This is the problem: is that during the 1950s there were a lot more practicing scientists who were willing to do things that we would consider unethical today.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the CIA specifically targeted some of those particular
Yeah.
individuals
Of course.
who they thought would
Yeah.
press the issue. So this is part of the problem. There's this whole question that Jeremy is bringing up with his tinfoil hat about if this is what they're telling us, and this is what we know has happened, and we know that a lot of the information has been either destroyed or never recorded, what else is under the surface?
Yeah.
Well, that had to spark, I'm sure, lots of conspiracies.
Yes.
So
it still does.
And this
yeah.
connects to,
Well, yeah.
I mean, it connects to what we talked about in the Alien. I think because we talked about MKUltra some in that episode, because many people have linked, and I think that there is a plausible
Oh,
train.
conspiracy Caleb. Here we go.
There's a plausible train of thought here
Yeah.
to suggest that some of, let me emphasize that, some of, not all of, because remember what we argued in the Alien episode. We argued that there were actually several different bodies of evidence that could all explain, um, as a sort of cumulative case, could explain the
Yeah.
UFO and abduction
It's
phenomena.
it's
Yeah.
multivalent.
It's not
Yeah.
It's
one,
multivalent.
not one thing
Yeah.
explains it.
Multiple things combined together to create the overall UFO alien encounter, alien abduction, really phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the ones that we suggested and that other people have thought about is the idea that, well, if the government is taking people and drugging them with hallucinogenic drugs and experimenting on them, in many cases outside of their own knowledge that this is happening, um, what is to say that this does not explain some of the testimony that people have of being abducted and being in a lab environment and things like that?
So you're saying there's a link.
There's a plausible, in my mind, link between the two things, right? So there have been lots of speculation. Some of the speculation like that, for example, I think is fairly justified in thinking about. However, there is a danger here, and gets back to the thing that you mentioned earlier. I didn't forget it.
I
The
knew you did.
Genesis 3 thing,
I jumped the gun.
which says there is something innate, and this is a caution to our listeners and viewers, to be careful of the conspiratorial mindset. Because the thing that's unnerving about this conspiracy is that this one's not a theory, this one's a fact, but do not fall into the trap of allowing yourself to be seduced by conspiracism, this view that everything is a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Or searching for where the conspiracy is in all things. And the reason why I think that this is a theological danger for us is because what was the first conspiracy? Well, the first conspiracy theory was introduced by the serpent in Genesis 3. And it is a conspiracy theory insofar as it questions the motives of those who are in power, right? Did God really say? Right? Does he really have your best interest in mind? Okay. And then it is a spinning of information, particularly the claim that there is knowledge, forbidden knowledge, that you do not have access to. And if you did, your life would be better. Right? If only you had the answer. Right?
The ultimate conspiracy.
Right. Search for this knowledge, and if you can crack the code of this particular knowledge, this will benefit you in some way. And this is, I think, is ingrained in human sinfulness to think, the powers that be are holding out on me, and what they're holding out in particular is knowledge that would somehow cause me to be like them, to have their power.
Well,
right?
There's more.
I think I have a slightly different take on this.
Interesting. Okay.
Which is that conspiracy of humanity that we accuse God of, God is involved in conspiracy against us. I think that, with the fall, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy about ourselves. To where now, because that is our conception of authority, because that is our conception of power, we enact that in whatever institutions we create, and we make that real amongst ourselves. And so I would say that, yes, actually, from what we know, we should expect, various institutions to be corrupt and awful. But for me, it's not because, like, if only we could overthrow those institutions, or if only we knew what was really going on, we would be powerful and life would be perfect. And I think that's where a lot of the conspiracy theories kind of go wrong. The thing for me is, I think this is a riddle with an empty answer, right? The conspiracy theories, because it turns out that the real truth behind all of these conspiracies is something we've known all along, which is the sin and the nihilism of the human heart. And that's absent of the grace of God.
Mm.
And that's something that we always knew was there. And we're just going through multiple other levels and other levels of social and bureaucratic and whatever complexity. But at the end of that horrible rainbow, we find the same thing, which is that we're profoundly messed up.
Yeah.
And the stories that we tell each other, the lies we tell each other about God, are really the truths about ourselves.
Yeah. So in other words, it's a scratch. It's an itch that can't be scratched.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
There's never a conspiracy, even if there's always some additional piece of knowledge to be found. Right. We've cracked the code on this, and that's going to lead us somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a there's this sort of perverse aspect of this whole thing, which is that what happens when the code is cracked in Genesis 3,
Yeah.
which is that when they receive the knowledge of good and evil, right? What actually happens is they realize that the content of the knowledge is actually their own sinfulness,
Yes.
Mm.
right? And so because the content of their knowledge is their own imminent death now, right? It actually the act of gaining the knowledge is actually the act that furnishes the content of the knowledge. Think about that for a moment, right?
So-
Which is that I know good and evil now because now all I had knowledge of was good prior, because all I had knowledge of was God and His good creation, and because I have acted in disobedience, now I know evil.
Mm.
Right? So it actually gives us the content of the knowledge. And so there's actually nothing else left. And so when they're looking in the pot at the end of the rainbow to try and find the treasure, what they realize is, no, actually this is the new knowledge that I've gained, and
Yeah.
it's a knowledge of emptiness.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right that this is what we're doing. We're making this a reality.
Yeah. Well, and the implication for the Christian is that if you truly want to rebel against a perverse social order, then something far more radical than breaking into a government archive and stealing
Yeah.
a bunch of documents is just living a virtuous life within the will of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is how you combat the conspiracy.
Yeah.
That it's not on a this worldly political social level,
Mm.
because by engaging in those narratives of power on their own terms, you are becoming part of that system.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, and it breeds confusion.
Yeah.
It breeds fear. It breeds all the things that are not of God. And something that you said, I had to look up the scripture, Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah.
right.
Well, and it's like if MK, if the government is still running around doing such things, how does that change my life? How does that
Yeah.
change my responsibilities? And granted, yes, if they are still doing such things, I could be directly affected, but I don't know that. So rather than obsessing over this or trying to, expose the grand conspiracy, which is largely probably a waste of time, focus instead on the things of the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
The kingdom, by the way, that is coming in and will displace all of this nonsense
Mhm.
eventually.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, and you said, one of you said, when they're doing this, they're elevating themselves to position. And what we find is that when we know that we're evil, that's what we are. But God, He's good, He's perfect in Himself, but then He also wants good for other people, which is the inverse of what all of these things do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of obsessing over that and getting yourself fearful and sucked into it, no, focus on Him, because His will is good and
Yeah,
perfect.
this sort of my final thought on the conspiracy, the impulse towards conspiracy theory,
Mm.
because
It's so easy to be entrapped,
this.
though.
No,
Yeah.
I think that, there are probably a lot of conspiracies that are real.
Well, the topic of
that
this
will,
episode is proof
yeah,
of that.
yeah.
That there are real ones, right?
Yeah.
But for me, it's like I think, I can say that, but at the same time, I can also say, so what? Spiritually, we know the terms of the conflict, and these tiny little skirmishes around human misbehavior and sinfulness, we already have a context that makes sense of all that and that shares us the ultimate truth. I mean, sometimes the details are important, right? Like, if you are a CIA director and that you know that there are immoral things going on,
Maybe you should do
then
something
maybe
about
you
it.
should do something about
Yeah.
it. But for the average person,
What can I do?
for the
About
average
about
person,
it? Yeah.
you can align yourself with the kingdom of God that is pushing all this out, not by engaging in acts of political radicalism, but by rejecting that system entirely
Yeah.
and living according to the will of God.
Yeah.
Well, this is what I was going to say about that with this about what should we do with this impulse, towards the conspiracy theory, right? Because there is real danger in it. So one reason why it's so enticing is because, like you said, there are true ones, and we have part of our design, which is that we are made in God's image, is that we have an impulse that's a good impulse, which is an impulse for truth, right? We want to seek after the truth. But where that becomes perverse is when we two things. One, when we seek knowledge that does not belong to us, right? That's what happened in Genesis 3. But two, when the threat of false knowledge or deception causes our foundation for truth to erode itself, where now everything becomes a conspiracy because, like Pontius Pilate, we ask rhetorically, what is truth? Right? This is the famous thing. Jesus says, look, my people who are of my kingdom that's not of this world, right? They know my voice. My sheep hear my voice, and he has come into the world to proclaim the truth. And Pilate says, what is truth? Rhetorically, as if to suggest this is an unknowable thing. Right? Truth is whoever has the power is the ones who impose truth. And that's what's concerning about conspiracies, right? If those who are in power above us are distorting the truth and obscuring reality from us, now we retreat into this radical skepticism to where now everything is false. And then we train ourselves not to be able to discern the truth. And you get people who deny the moon landing, right?
Yeah.
You know who you are.
Well, it's kind of like that joke from Men in Black, or to get the real news, you have to read the crazy alien tabloids, because that's
the
closer to the
National
truth.
Enquirer, yeah.
Yeah, because that's closer to the truth than like the New York Times. And it's like, okay, I mean, I think a dose of skepticism is healthy,
Sure.
but at the end of the day, and you can believe that certain outfits are more reputable and truthful than others, but what you don't want to do is to reject the concept of truth entirely.
Right, right. To assume that everything is a lie.
Yeah.
Because this is the point that Jesus, I think, was making, which is to say that truth is not only and not primarily propositional. Truth is actually it is propositional, by the way, but it is primarily personal, insofar as Christ is the truth, right? The Christ is the truth embodied, which means that the scripture that you quoted earlier, how do I become the kind of person who is able to discern truth? Right, who is not fooled by the deception of the world and the enemy and myself, by the way.
Is
Put
it
on
by
a hat like
yeah?
that.
Is it by scouring shady internet forums for the one guy who's finally gonna give you the real truth about something that
Yeah,
happened?
is it by deciphering the images on the back of the dollar bill, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Is it by cracking the Bible code?
exactly. No, the answer is the way that I become that kind of person is that I renew my mind. How do I renew my mind? By having the mind that was also in Christ Jesus, right?
Well, I joke about the hat, but it's the armor of God.
That's
it's
right.
putting that on, and
That's right. By aligning my mind with the mind of Christ, who is truth. If the truth is a person and I am in that person, I am in Christ, then I can be, by the power of the Holy Spirit, by training myself in righteousness, I can become the kind of person who discerns the truth, and the kind of truth that matters, that's important, and not participating. I mean, there are texts in the Old Testament that says, "Don't let the conspiracy of this people be your conspiracy," right? Which is to say, some matters are not worth you wasting your time in because you have more important matters to concern yourself with.
Yeah.
And look at the life of Jesus. there were conspiracy theories about Jesus during his own day,
Mm.
right? The Romans thought that he was going to try to overthrow their government. They were putting him in the context of, oh, they're political revolutionaries. The powers that be among the Pharisees and whatever had, there was all sorts of misinformation. Like, this guy can't be who he represents himself as. He has to be demonic. All sorts of, like, just questioning.
The first explanation for the
Mhm.
resurrection is the disciples stole the
Yeah.
body, right?
Oh,
This is a
yeah.
conspiracy.
And so, and you look at how Jesus and his followers responded to that. And it wasn't primarily, to refute things on a factual basis and produce receipts. There was some of that can be good.
The empty tomb is a receipt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is, but more so it was, okay, well, that's fine. But how the primary way we're going to combat that is to continue about the kingdom business.
Yeah, yeah. I think to bring us to a close, um, you know, I think as Christians, you mentioned just a word of caution. I think we even do this as Christians. I mean, I think of conspiracies of like the end times and when he's
Mhm.
coming back and these
Oh
people
boy,
prophets that
that's a whole other episode.
yeah, but I think it's so easy to do this, and there's a lot of conspiracies going on with what's happening in our world right now
Mhm.
too, and even in our nation. And I think it can be fun to kind of I mean, we're talking about MKUltra today. It can be fun to talk about it, but you know, I think when you said it, like we've got to fix our minds and our hearts on what is actually important, and not be because what they are is they're distractions. They're distractions from what we actually need to be doing in the world.
That's
So.
right. Yeah. Amen.
All right. Well, thank y'all so much for tuning in to our first video. I had a really good time.
Yeah.
Season 2, we're off to the races. And we'll see y'all next time.